In this video, I'm going to tell you how I tricked my brain to create automatic success in my life. If you don't know anything about my personal story, I'll just briefly tell you that I was a maid and a single mother for over 15 years. I had a ton of anxiety and not a ton of money, and I was in what I considered to be the struggling department. I now hold a PhD in philosophy, a successful online coaching platform, a successful YouTube channel. My personal life is great. I'm abundant, I'm happy, and I'm creating new success in my life all the time. So how did I do that when research has discovered that approximately 95% of people who set goals do not follow through with what it takes to create them? I used to be in that 95%, and like most people in that percentile, I didn't know why this happened. I would procrastinate, repeat limiting beliefs to myself, and act in ways that didn't produce successful results, even when I knew I was doing it. Here's the scientific reason why this happens. When we make plans for ourselves, like creating a successful business, manifesting a dynamic relationship, or developing the physique we want, we tend to look at these things as being future events. In looking at the future, the brain says, okay, I can get on board with that and see how it will be beneficial to our existence. However, when it comes to making immediate decisions and behaviors that align with those goals, the brain prefers to stay consistent with a more instant gratification point of view. It thinks from the present self vantage point and what the immediate payoffs the present self can experience. It might be on board with the benefits of the long-term goals, but it holds more value regarding present moment satisfaction. And why does it do this? The simple answer is dopamine. In the brain, we have neurotransmitters that send signals between one neuron and the next. Neurotransmitters are chemicals made by nerve cells called neurons. They're used to communicate messages across different parts of the brain and between the brain and the rest of the body. Dopamine is involved mainly in controlling movement. It's a neurotransmitter that helps send signals in the brain that relate to motivation, and it's known as the feel-good neurotransmitter. Dopamine is released when we eat food that we crave, meet someone new that we like, win a trophy, or any other event that contributes to feelings of pleasure and satisfaction. Dopamine is also the reason individuals become addicted to specific substances and other modes of behavior. It's a reward system to the brain and body because it boosts the mood and attention, and it motivates us in specific ways, including behavior and physical action. And although it's very normal for dopamine levels to fluctuate, low dopamine is linked to low enthusiasm, low attention span, and decreased motivation. The bottom line is that dopamine can drive us to successful outcomes because it motivates us. Here's how that works. We experience a trigger and then enact a behavior automatically. That behavior will almost always align with what the brain deems as the biggest reward, which is what dopamine is to the brain. So how do we trick our brains into being rewarded for things that drive us towards success so it will cause us to behave in ways that are consistent with that? In my own research for this, I discovered a series of psychological studies conducted by Walter Mischel, a Stanford professor, that gave me a very big clue as to how to do this. During Professor Mischel's experiments, he tested hundreds of children, mostly between the ages of 4 and 5 years old. Each child was brought into a private room by a researcher, seated at a table, and given a marshmallow placed in front of them. They were then given a deal with incentive. If the child refrained from eating the marshmallow, when the researcher returned, they would receive a second marshmallow. But if the child decided to eat the marshmallow during the time the researcher was gone, they would not receive the second one. Ultimately, the choice was this: an instantaneous reward or double the reward in exchange for a little self-discipline. In filming the children, they saw that some of the children ate the marshmallow as soon as the researcher left the room. Others tried very hard to wait, but ultimately surrendered to their craving for the treat. And a few of the children managed to wait until the researcher returned, receiving their reward for doing so. But the experiments didn't stop there. As the children became older, the researchers followed up on them and their progress in specific areas of their lives. Interestingly, the individuals who delayed gratification were marked as being, and I'll quote this from the research article, academically and socially competent, verbally fluent, rational, attentive, planful, and able to deal with frustration and stress. They were also reported to have overall higher scholastic performance. The children were followed into adulthood for over 40 years. The overall conclusion? The ones who waited for the higher reward were consistently reported as more successful in all areas of their lives than the children who chose the instant gratification. They were more likely to succeed with their goals. Okay, so now that we've discovered that, it's important to know that the brain develops habits based on what it considers to be the reward. One of the common features that all life possesses is a mechanism for maintaining orderly conditions. When the brain gets used to feeling a certain way due to the dopamine reward, it starts going there more and more because it's familiar and easy to get to, mostly because of what are known as synapses within the brain, which I'll get into in just a minute. But it's important to note that if the brain dismisses long-term goals to go for the instant gratification of something that may detour from those long-term goals, it will be because the brain has created the habit of doing so. Synapses are connections in our brains that form during development in the womb and are strengthened during childhood and adolescence. As we get older, we go through a process known as synaptic pruning. This is the process by which extra neurons and synaptic connections are eliminated in order to increase the efficiency of the pathways that we use most often. You can think of these as roadways that have been well established over time in order to make traveling much easier and more efficient. And the ones that get rewarded the most with those dopamine rushes are the ones that will be the most traveled. And that's what makes a habit. What happens in the brain and body is much like a thermostat regulating the temperature of a room. With a thermostat, as the temperature in a room changes, the thermostat regulates the unit to return the room to a predetermined state. Our brains do much the same thing in order to keep us within specific boundaries, or those established roadways, in order to be efficient, to conserve energy within the brain and body, and to create the most reward. However, just as new roadways can be created, synapses can be strengthened and/or restructured through deliberate conscious effort and a little self-discipline. If you teach your brain that the greater reward comes with delayed gratification, you can create new automatic habits that bring you greater rewards. When we update the reward value of our behavior, we can easily create new habits that drive us towards success. So here's how I did this. The first step was allowing myself to start thinking that success could be possible. I didn't believe that yet, so I just nurtured the thought until I could prove it to myself. Secondly, there's a term in psychology known as implementation intention. This is a strategy that leads to better goal attainment and assists in modifying behavior, brain reward, and in turn creating new habits. With these types of intentions, you specify the when, where, and how portions of goal-directed behavior. For example, I will study at my desk on specific date and time for 1 hour. This automates action and assists in overcoming procrastination. In other words, it makes a person much more likely to perform an action, and some say as much as 5 times more likely. And in my case, I felt committed to it once I wrote it down, so it worked. The next thing I did was I wrote a 2-column list. Using the implementation intentions that I just mentioned, in the first column, I wrote a list of committed actions to follow through with that would lead me towards my success. In the second column, I listed rewards that I would allow myself once those actions were completed. These were daily actions and daily rewards, so it doesn't have to be all work and no play. In fact, the reward's super important. This taught my brain that it would receive a reward after doing something that moved me towards success. This also kept me from depleting my dopamine levels early in the day, which would cause a decrease in motivation if I had done that. Then I removed myself from distractions that would activate the dopamine craving my brain was used to with the old habits that weren't working for me. For example, I would move my phone to another room, avoid social media completely, which I still do to this day with the exception of business purposes. I think this is a really important point because social media is extremely distracting and extremely addictive because of the reward system in the brain. And then I stopped buying snack foods, which might give me an excuse to walk away from a commitment. So these are just my examples of things that distracted me, and you may find that you have other things that reward your brain that might be considered distractions that keep you from doing the things that would actually drive you towards success. The next thing I did was I put a note up near my desk that read this: procrastination feels bad, success feels great. This reminded my brain of the rewards it would receive for creating success. Each trigger we have creates a behavior that creates a reward for the brain. Starting with a behavior can sometimes be the thing that blocks us. This note triggered me to start a behavior that was working for me and the life I wanted to live, which is the reward. It's important to note here that the behavior with the biggest reward is always the one that we're going to act out. So you have to trick your brain into understanding what the new, bigger reward is so that it will create the habit of going towards that. And the last thing I did was I gave myself positive rewards that were linked to increased dopamine levels. And these included things such as listening to high vibrational music, spending time in nature and soaking up the sun, meditation, restful sleep, and creating vision boards that included things that I considered as successful outcomes. To change a habit, we have to change the experience of the rewards we are getting from our behavior. In doing so, we create automatic behaviors that become habitual and drive us towards success. Oftentimes, our reward system is outdated. Ask yourself how rewarding your current behavior is when it comes to creating success in your life. If your answer is anything less than very rewarding, it may be time to update the reward system you're giving your brain. And when you do this, you trick your brain into creating automatic success in your life.